Been in the newspaper business for 40 plus years, right out of high school. And I've run the gamut of starting at the bottom as a typesetter, working my way into the newsroom. I've done production, ad layout. And so, everything except for actually running a printing press, let's put it that way. Um, I've been at this weekly local newspaper in Bradford, Vermont for 25 years. And in 2022, had the opportunity to purchase it from my former employer. Basically, we're stewards of a newspaper that's been around for 160 years. History is something that I love and always have. And I've been a writer all my life, and I started doing articles. Um, and I had the opportunity to do one on an Underground Railroad safe house in Haverhill, New Hampshire, back in 1990s. And that began peeling the onion of this history that nobody really accepted at the time. And also it's hidden. So that's something we want to talk about today, is the fact that there's a lot of things that happened before the Civil War. And a lot of Black heritage, a lot of Underground Railroad efforts in New England are just starting to surface.
So where do you find, if the history is hidden, where do you source the information that's still being uncovered? How does that happen?
So it's very similar to Civil War history, where someone cleans out great grandpa's attic and finds Civil War letters and finds out about the experience that a soldier had. It's very much like that. And people are still finding things about the Civil War. Um, so the problem with the Underground Railroad efforts in New England and anywhere is that they had to be done discreetly for the safety of the people they were helping, fugitive enslaved people, and also for themselves. Each agent had to protect their own world, because it was not an acceptable thing to help and do something that was illegal by helping 1800s up to 1860s. You were doing something illegal if you were helping a fugitive.
As you are, when I'm thinking about the time period, I'm thinking about women's role in society,
Hmm.
and the enslaved role and the men's role. And the men's history is what has been moved forward, their courage
Mm.
and their accomplishments or conquests. Have you uncovered any of the women's stories in those families? Were they aware of what was happening? Were they
Mm.
initiating or influencing or?
I think what you said is true, is that the men's role is the one that we've come to learn.
Mhm.
And the main thing about history in any situation is we're left with the impressions and perspectives of the person who wrote it down on paper. That doesn't mean that it is accurate reporting. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that that's actually what happened. So that's where the hidden part comes in, is that you have people, you have women, you have Blacks, uh, you have these stories that just were never told, because the person who was recording all of this did not want that side of it. They wanted to paint a picture of, you know, the, the heroic white males. There were lots of women who were involved, and there were lots of women who are nameless. And then there are all these wives of the Underground Railroad agents who I researched. You
Mhm.
have their wives. I do know some. I do know Nancy Safford in Springfield, Vermont. I know Nancy Carlton in Littleton, New Hampshire. I know Armenia White in Concord, New Hampshire. I know of them, but that's only because they were given their credit in the 19th century. Otherwise, we would just know them as Mrs. Carlton, and not know that there was any involvement. But of course there was. There were some instances where it was secret. A man was doing the work and he wasn't telling anybody in his family. But for the most part, who's going to be cooking the bread and the stew to give to someone who's hiding out in the barn? It's not going to be dad, it's going to be mom. It's pretty fascinating. And the more you dig into it, there are some really good books that have come out about women in the abolitionist movement. And that was a very risky thing for them to do because, like you said, looking back at this time frame, if you stood up in your town and said, I'm against slavery and I think we should eliminate it, we think that everybody in the North would be like, yeah, and vote for that guy, let's make him a senator. No, that's not how it was. Because in the North, before the Civil War, it was really, let's not rock the boat. Don't change our country. Our country's fine. It's not our problem because, they're not enslaving us. We're not doing it. So when you stood up, you were the radical. You were the one that they threw eggs at and that they tried to shut you up. Abolitionists who traveled around New England were not received very well. Sometimes they were, but most of the time they were not. They were mobs. There were people who were trying to get them to just, leave. We don't want you stirring the pot. Women had a very important role in the abolitionist movement. And they started organizing amongst themselves, and they created the keystone of the strength of the abolitionist movement. Early on, 1830s, there were over 200 female anti-slavery societies in the North. That's a lot, especially when only like 1% of Northerners were abolitionists. 1% out of the whole population were actually vocal, active abolitionists trying to change our Constitution and get rid of slavery. So to have 200 societies, just women, says a lot. And they were very active in building this structure of spreading the word, getting out there and canvassing and handing out pamphlets. It's almost like a religious fervor. And what they were doing was they were handing out pamphlets. They were they held anti-slavery fairs where they had craft fairs. And the whole idea was to raise money to help the fugitives and the cause. So you had this underlying foundation of women working silently to change the world that they knew. And that's a pretty amazing thing. And
I heard a definition of racism. Actually, I think it was Dr. Nikki Lanier this week who said racism is the fundamental belief that Black and brown people are not fully human,
mm,
and the systems and policies that are built to further that belief. And I thought, if you could just say to oblivious white women, our audience, do you believe that Black people are fully human? That should stop somebody in their tracks to go, why wouldn't I think that? And then
right.
It has an opportunity to uncover some of the biases that we have generationally brought into our bodies that we may not even be conscious of as we.
But when I started researching the Underground Railroad, I had to understand what slavery really was and what people who had slaves, what they really thought of them. And that's when I learned about how they seriously, even the most intelligent people in the 19th century and before that, from the start of our country, how they seriously did not think that these were people. Profiling how states, how why eugenics was a big thing in the 30s, because that was a way of culling out the bad genes and the bad races.
Mhm.
It's disgusting. And it's very, really, our country is really, really just kind of focused on white is the way of our country, and that's a real American. And that's not true. That's not true at all.
It wasn't then and it's not now.
It's not.